Around the world, some crimes are so horrific that even child offenders receive the harshest punishments. Juvenile killers, those who commit brutal murders at a young age, are often sent to some of the most inhuman prisons, where survival is a daily struggle. These prisons are not just centers of physical punishment, but also places where inmates are mentally and emotionally broken. Some are sentenced to lifelong solitary confinement. Others are locked away with the most dangerous criminals, and many endure relentless abuse from guards and fellow prisoners. Life inside these walls is a nightmare, raising questions about justice, rehabilitation, and whether such severe treatment is truly justified. The most brutal prisons. Across the world, several prisons are notorious for their inhuman treatment of juvenile killers. These facilities are designed to break inmates physically and mentally, offering little hope for rehabilitation. One of the most feared prisons is Black Dolphin Prison in Russia. Although primarily for adult criminals, some juvenile killers are sent here, subjected to 24-hour surveillance, extreme isolation, and brutal discipline. Inmates are forced to follow strict routines, with no chance of escape or leniency. In Brazil's Unit 25, overcrowding, gang violence, and lack of basic necessities make survival nearly impossible. Young offenders are often abused by older, hardened criminals, making the prison a breeding ground for further violence. Another terrifying facility is Puli Charki Prison in Afghanistan, where juvenile killers are often placed alongside terrorists and war criminals. The prison is infamous for its unhygienic conditions, lack of medical care, and extreme violence. These prisons serve as living nightmares, where justice often blurs into cruelty. The conditions raise serious ethical questions. Should child criminals be punished so severely, or should they be given a chance at rehabilitation? Daily life behind bars. Life inside these brutal prisons is a constant battle for survival. Juvenile killers, despite their age, are treated as the worst criminals, facing extreme punishments, isolation, and violence. A typical day begins before dawn, with harsh wake-up calls and immediate roll calls. In prisons like Black Dolphin, Russia, inmates are forced to stand for long hours, never allowed to relax or lower their guard. They are monitored 24/7, with strict routines that leave no room for personal freedom. Food is barely edible, often just stale bread and watery soup. Medical care is almost non-existent, and injuries from fights or punishments often go untreated. In places like Brazil's Unit 25, young prisoners must align with gangs to survive, risking their lives in brutal fights. Punishments are severe. Solitary confinement, physical beatings, and psychological torture are common. Inmates can go days or weeks without speaking to anyone. Many suffer extreme mental distress, leading to anxiety, depression, or even suicide. For these young killers, prison is not just a place of punishment. It's a place where they either harden into more dangerous criminals or break completely under the weight of inhuman conditions. Notorious cases? Some of the most chilling cases of juvenile killers have led to their imprisonment in the world's most brutal facilities. These young offenders, despite their age, committed crimes so horrific that society showed them no mercy. One of the most infamous cases is Jesse Pomeroy, a 14-year-old from the United States who tortured and killed younger children in the 1800s. He was sentenced to life in solitary confinement, spending decades in complete isolation, a punishment considered extreme even by today's standards. In the UK, John Venables and Robert Thompson, both just 10 years old, abducted and murdered 2-year-old James Bulger in 1993. The crime shocked the world, and despite being placed in secure juvenile facilities rather than adult prisons, their case remains one of the most notorious examples of child killers facing lifelong scrutiny. Another terrifying case is that of Caetano Santos Godinho, known as the Big-Eared Devil, an Argentine boy who, at just 16, was imprisoned for murdering and attempting to kill several children. He was sent to a harsh correctional facility, where he spent his life suffering violence at the hands of other inmates before dying in captivity. These cases raise difficult questions about how society should handle young killers. Should they be locked away forever, or should they be given a chance to reform? Many of these child criminals never escape the horrors of prison, living out their days in some of the most unforgiving conditions imaginable. Rehabilitation or retribution? The imprisonment of juvenile killers sparks an ongoing debate. Should society focus on rehabilitation, giving them a chance to change, or retribution, punishing them severely for their crimes? Supporters of rehabilitation argue that children's may rehabilitation or retribution. The imprisonment of juvenile killers sparks an ongoing debate. Should society focus on rehabilitation, giving them a chance to change, or retribution, punishing them severely for their crimes? Supporters of rehabilitation argue that children's minds are still developing, and many young killers commit crimes due to abuse, trauma, or mental illness. Instead of brutal punishment, they should receive psychological support, education, and counseling to reintegrate into society. Countries like Norway prioritize rehabilitation, offering therapy and education to juvenile offenders, with some success in preventing repeat offenses. On the other hand, advocates of retribution believe that crimes, especially murder, must be met with severe punishment, regardless of the offender's age. They argue that some young criminals are too dangerous to be rehabilitated and should be locked away permanently to protect society. Prisons like Black Dolphin and Unit 25 represent this extreme approach, treating juvenile killers as harshly as adult criminals. The balance between justice and mercy remains a complex issue. While some young killers may change, others might become even more violent in prison. The key question is, can society risk giving them a second chance, or is the safety of others more important than their rehabilitation? Conclusion. The fate of juvenile killers remains one of the most difficult moral and legal dilemmas. While some argue that these young offenders deserve a chance at rehabilitation, others believe that their crimes are too severe to be forgiven. The inhuman conditions of prisons like Black Dolphin and Unit 25 raise serious ethical concerns. Do such punishments truly serve justice, or do they only create more hardened criminals? For many of these young killers, prison becomes a place of extreme suffering, where they either lose their humanity or become even more dangerous. While some countries focus on reforming juvenile offenders, others impose severe punishments, leaving little hope for redemption. Ultimately, society must decide whether to treat these young criminals as lost causes or as individuals capable of change. Striking the right balance between justice and rehabilitation is crucial, not only for these offenders but for the safety and moral integrity of society as a whole.